Well, welcome back. Hope you enjoyed your lunch and your after lunch sessions. And we're getting ready now to roll into our keynote. Before we do, I want to introduce Mike and Kirsten Nemeth Abbott. They are with the Nemeth Abbott Foundation. Let's see, Kirsten. Okay. And I have to tell our story. So the Jonathan Foundation really wasn't in the market for hiring Dr. Daniel Amen to come to our conference. We didn't see funding for that, but we did have our conference covered. And Kirsten approached me and said, I really want to do something in the arena of mental health. What do you have? What do you need? And I said, well, we have this conference coming up. We really got everything covered, so I'm not sure, but I'm sure we can come up with something. She said, well, what do you want? I said, oh, well, we want a national speaker. She said, okay, well, do you know who? I said, I absolutely know who, Dr. Daniel Amen. I consider Dr. Amen to be the world's renowned neuropsychiatrist. And if you were here at lunch, you heard my story, Jonathan's story, and you know that my son was a patient at the Amen Clinic. So we are just delighted that because of the generosity of Kirsten and Mike through the Nemeth Abbott Foundation, we were able to get Dr. Amen, and he'll be joining us as keynote. So I'm going to turn it over to Mike now, who is going to introduce our keynote speaker.
Appreciate those kind words, and we're very proud to support this endeavor. Dr. Daniel Amen's mission is to end mental illness by creating a revolution in brain health. He's dedicated to providing the education, products, and services to accomplish this goal. Dr. Amen is a physician, adult and child psychologist or psychiatrist, and founder of the Amen Clinics with 11 locations across the United States. Amen Clinics has the world's largest database of brain scans for psychiatry, totaling more than 250,000 SPECT scans on patients from 155 countries. He's the founder of BrainMD, a fast-growing, science-based nutraceutical company, and Amen University, which has trained thousands of medical and mental health professionals on the methods he's developed. Dr. Amen is one of the most visible and influential experts on brain health and mental health with millions of followers on social media. In 2020, Dr. Amen launched his digital series, Scan My Brain, featuring high-profile actors, musical artists, athletes, entrepreneurs, and influencers that airs on YouTube and Instagram. Over 100 episodes have aired, turning it into viral social media content with collectively millions of views. He's also produced 18 national public television shows about the brain, and his online videos on brain and mental health have been viewed over 300 million times. Dr. Amen is a 12-time New York Times bestselling author, including Change Your Brain, Change Your Life, The End of Mental Illness, Healing ADD, and many more. His newest book, Raising Mentally Strong Kids, will be released in March 2024. With that introduction, I'm pleased to turn this over to Dr. Daniel Amen.
So great to see everybody. Sorry I'm not there in person, but I am very excited to partner with you and bring a completely new paradigm to psychiatry. Hopefully you can see my slides. So I want you to raise your hand, and I can actually see you, if you've ever loved someone with a brain or mental health issue. If you've ever struggled. And I want you to think about them as I talk. Brain and mental health issues affect all of us. No one escapes. And the incidence is skyrocketing with the deaths from drugs, alcohol, and suicide at their highest level in recorded history. And that was before the pandemic, and then everything was worse. But I believe we are on the cusp of a new revolution based on over 250,000 SPECT scans we've done in Amen clinics. I've come to believe that most psychiatric illnesses are not mental health issues at all, but rather they are brain health issues that steal people's minds. And this one idea changes everything. Get your brain right and your mind will follow. Your brain can have problems just like your heart can have problems, yet most people who see cardiologists have never had a heart attack. They are there to prevent them. I see a day, if we are ever going to end mental illness, we must develop a similar way of thinking where we know the brain's risk factors and address each one of them before trouble starts. So for example, teenagers who sleep just an hour on average less than their peers have a higher incidence of depression and suicide. People who have gut health issues, that is associated with anxiety, insomnia, and brain fog. Infections like Lyme disease or COVID can cause people to be angry, depressed, even psychotic. 25% of people with COVID will develop a new onset psychiatric illness within the next 6 months. Think about that, given that almost all of us have had COVID, is one of the reasons for the dramatic increase in mental health issues around the world. I have been blessed to see a number of fun, interesting people. This is Kendall Jenner, who saw me after she had an anxiety disorder induced by COVID. And here you're looking at 2 SPECT scans. We're looking at active scans. I'll show you more about them in a little bit. But the image on the left is healthy. Blue is average activity. Red is the top 15%. White is the top 8%. Should be in the back bottom part of the brain. You see Kendall's emotional brain is just on fire. Inflammation caused by COVID that creates what many people call a mental disorder. I think this is a brain health issue. So our mission at Amen Clinics is to end the concept of mental illness by creating a revolution in brain health. And I believe it's possible, and I believe the conference today is a step in the right direction. So I want to focus my talk on talking about scientific revolutions and how you can play a role in making it happen. So it's based on this book called The Structure of Scientific Revolutions by Thomas Kuhn, who is a medical historian. And the book actually came out in 1962, but it is so applicable today. And he says scientific revolutions happen in 6 stages. Stage 1 is normal science or the status quo. And I argue the status quo is awful. This is how psychiatric diagnoses are made in virtually every clinic in the country. Symptoms equals diagnosis equals treatment. Think about that. You're depressed. You go to your doctor and say, I'm depressed. He gives you a diagnosis of the same name as your symptom or your complaint, or you're depressed, and then he gives you an antidepressant, which in large-scale studies work no better than placebo. Or the most common psychiatric diagnosis today is anxiety. So you go, I'm anxious. He gives you a diagnosis with the same name you just told him. And then he gives you anti-anxiety medicines, which have skyrocketed. But the benzodiazepines are addictive and increase the risk of dementia. Or you tell the doctor you have an addiction and you can't stop, or your wife or your husband says, or your parents, and they give you a diagnosis of an addiction and then send you to a residential treatment facility, which is very expensive, or send you to a 12-step program, which have very low efficacy rates. Or you go, I can't pay attention. It seems to happen to all of us these days. And so they give you a diagnosis called attention deficit disorder or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And they give you a stimulant, which helps some people, but makes many more people worse. Or my favorite diagnosis to explain the insanity of our diagnostic system is you tell the doctor you have temper problems or that you explode periodically or intermittently. There's actually a DSM, Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, diagnosis for intermittent explosive disorder, IED. Think of the devices in Iraq and Afghanistan, sort of a funny name, but it doesn't tell you at all what's causing it, and it doesn't tell you at all what to do for it, with no biological data. So these diagnoses are made across the world without any biological data, exactly like Lincoln was diagnosed with melancholia or depression in 1840. So I love Lincoln. He's one of my heroes. He failed repeatedly and then became a wild success. And he was suicidal twice in his life. And in the winter of 1840, after a political setback, he got very depressed. His friends actually took his knives from him because they were worried he was going to kill himself. And they brought him to see Dr. Anson Henry in Springfield, Illinois. And how did Dr. Henry diagnose Lincoln with melancholia? He talked to him. He looked at him. He looked for symptom clusters, then diagnosed and treated him. And you tell me that's not exactly how millions of people are being diagnosed every year with psychiatric disorders, put on psychiatric medication with no biological data. And I would argue that's insane. And we have to ask ourselves why psychiatry remains the only medical specialty that virtually never looks at the organ it treats. Cardiologists look, neurologists look, orthopedic doctors look, every other medical specialist look at the organs they treat. Psychiatrists guess. And if we look at the status quo, the symptom cluster diagnoses, 25% of the US population is now on psychiatric medication. In 2021, there's more now. There are 337 million prescriptions written for antidepressants. 27% of all doctor visits, someone is getting a benzodiazepine. That is a horrifying statistic. 85% of psychiatric drugs are prescribed by non-psychiatric physicians in 10-minute office visits who do standard of care treatment 12% of the time, without ever teaching people the skills to manage their minds or improve the health of their brain. Again, I believe that's insane. So stage 2 is the discrepancy show. And I remember as a young psychiatrist, I prescribed Prozac for depression based on symptom clusters, or Ritalin for ADD or ADHD based on symptom clusters. Some people would get better, but others became violent or even suicidal. Did you know all psychiatric medications have black box warnings? Why? Because they hurt people. The scans show that depression is like chest pain, and no one gets a diagnosis of chest pain. Why? It doesn't tell you what causes it or what to do for it. Starting everyone in the same treatment for chest pain, nitroglycerin, is ridiculous, and it's malpractice. Like chest pain, depression or anxiety disorders or ADHD or obsessive compulsive disorder or bipolar disorder or schizophrenia have many different causes. One treatment will never work for everyone who's depressed. Symptom clusters will not tell you if the brain is toxic, if it's traumatic, if it works too hard or not hard enough. And because psychiatrists and people who treat psychiatric patients never look at the brain, they unnecessarily fly blind, miss important information, and hurt people. So this is Adriana, normal, beautiful, smart, until she's 16 and goes to Yosemite on vacation with her family. And when they get to Yosemite National Park here in California, they're surrounded by 6 deer. And they think it's a magical moment. But 10 days later, Adriana starts to hallucinate, becomes psychotic, paranoid, depressed, and she ends up in a psychiatric hospital. She's diagnosed with schizophrenia. The doctor who was trained at Stanford told the mother that she needed to be on an antipsychotic for the rest of her life. Well, if you knew her mother wouldn't have any of that. And she had tried 3 different antipsychotics. The family had spent over $100,000 trying to get her help. And as often people say to us when they come to Amen clinics, "You're my last hope." Well, 6 months later, she's a shell of herself. When we scanned her, she has overactivity in her brain in a pattern that's associated with inflammation. And it led us to ask why. And it turned out she had Lyme disease, and on an antibiotic, she got her mind back. Now, this is really important. I think infectious disease is a major cause of psychiatric disorders, and very few psychiatrists ever think about it or ever check for them. So, since she got treated, she graduated from Pepperdine University with a bachelor's degree. She then went to London and studied at the University of London and got a master's degree in human resources. And today, she's normal. Look at this map. This is from Schizophrenia Bulletin. Actually, in 1994. So it's not like this is new information. The top in red is the highest rates of schizophrenia in the United States. The bottom in gray is the highest incidence of Lyme disease. And if you overlay them, they're nearly identical. So stage 3 is the status quo also sees a problem, but makes small fixes that basically leaves the monetary system in place to protect itself. And I don't know if you know, but there are actually 6 versions of the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, but it is basically unchanged. since 1980. So despite 44 years of progress in neuroscience, how we name things in psychiatry is virtually the same. Tom Insel, who's director of the National Institute of Mental Health, when DSM-5 came out, it was a big row because he said publicly it's 100% reliable, which means if you make a diagnosis based on this book today, you'll make that diagnosis tomorrow. But then he went on to say it's 0% valid because it's not based on any underlying neuroscience. We can do better. Stage 4 is the revolution. I realized a long time ago that the status quo really is a shit show. Depression has gone up 400% since 1987, the year Prozac was approved. Alzheimer's disease is expected to triple. 50% of the population is diabetic or pre-diabetic. 72% of the population is overweight or obese. And I believe the answer to these epidemic problems is not to see them as separate disorders, but as different expressions of the same unhealthy lifestyle, infections and exposures that have exactly the same cure that starts by changing your brain. So what if we ended the concept of mental illness and focused on getting people's brains healthy? So the model we use at Amen Clinics is what we refer to our 4 circles model, that we want to look at and optimize your brain. Bright Minds is a mnemonic we use if you want to keep your brain healthy or rescue it. You have to prevent or treat the 11 major risk factors that steal your mind. And we know what they are. Think of the brain circle is the brain is the hardware of your soul. And you know, in a computer analogy, you can't program a computer that has hardware problems. The first thing to fix is the hardware, so it can run the software, which is your mind. And we work on training the mind. And I have a technique called killing the ants, the automatic negative thoughts that steal your happiness. We try to assess the ant populations in our patients' minds. The social circle, which is what's happening in your life, what's happening in society, how are you getting along with the people that are important to you? And the spiritual circle, which most psychiatrists won't touch, but it's why do you care? What is your deepest sense of meaning and purpose? It's your connection with God, with the planet, with the past, and the future. And I think, in relation to my patients, all 4 circles all the time. I hate the term mental illness because it stains everyone diagnosed, making them less likely to seek help. No one is shamed for cancer or heart disease. Likewise, no one should be shamed for OCD, bipolar disorder, or PTSD. Yet if we don't embrace a new paradigm to lower stigma, many more people will suffer and die. Every 40 seconds, someone dies from suicide. It's the second leading cause of death among young. It is now almost first. It has increased 35% since 1999, while cancer has declined 27%. Why? We're working on the wrong paradigm. Mental illness places the emphasis on your psyche or your mind, which is vague or hard to define, when our brain imaging work clearly shows these are brain health issues that steal people's minds. One of my favorite cases ever is a boy by the name of Jarrett, who was diagnosed with ADHD in preschool, hyperactive, restless, impulsive, no friends. He had learning problems. He saw 5 pediatricians and child psychiatrists. They tried him on 5 stimulant medications. And quite frankly, if you failed the second stimulant, who's got the learning problem? The stimulants triggered rages and mood swings. They were going to put him on an antipsychotic medicine, at which point his mother brought him to Amen Clinics because she didn't want to do that. So here's an example of the brain imaging work we do. This is a healthy SPECT scan. And SPECT is a nuclear medicine study that looks at blood flow and activity. It looks at how your brain works. And it basically shows us 3 things: good activity, too little, or too much. And then my job is to balance it. And the image on the left, we're looking at the outside surface, should be full, even, and symmetrical. Color doesn't matter, it's the shape. The image on the right, the color does matter. Blue is average activity, red is the top 15%. So if we look at Jarrett versus healthy, he has a pattern we call the ring of fire, which is too much activity in the brain. And giving him a stimulant is like pouring gasoline on a fire. But how would you know if you never looked? So over the next 10 years, on natural supplements to calm his brain healthy habits, his behavior was better, the rages stopped, he was able to make friends, was on the honor roll for 10 years. He wants to be a firefighter. And here, he and I are at an event for our foundation, the Change Your Brain Foundation. And I'm like, why do you want to be a firefighter? Because being a firefighter is a brain damaging job. He said, on someone's worst day, I want to make it better. And you can see that through the imaging work we did and natural ways to heal the brain, we helped change the trajectory of Jarrett's life. And here he is training to be a firefighter. I am so proud to know him and to be part of his story. So let's just talk about how psychiatry has been through the ages. In ancient civilization, if you acted irrationally, erratically, they would have drilled a hole in your skull to let out the evil spirits. Ouch. In the time of Hippocrates, they would have changed your diet, got you to exercise, love that, and then they would have bled you to help balance the humors of fluids that were out of balance. Not a fan of bleeding unless you have high ferritin levels. In the Middle Ages, they may have put Jarrett in an asylum. In the 18th, 19th century, they may have sterilized him and placed his family under suspicion in the eugenics program, which was the precursor to Nazi atrocities. In the 20th century, Freud may have put him on the couch and talked about his internal conflicts, especially his relationship with his mother, why her mother's always to blame. In the 1950s, he might have gotten a lobotomy. You know, the person who created the lobotomy won the Nobel Prize in medicine. So I'm thinking I don't really want to win a Nobel Prize. In the 1960s, he might have been given electroconvulsive therapy, not the kind of buzz he would want. And today, it's the 10-minute med check, 10 minutes if you're lucky, and people are often on multiple medications. If someone comes to see us, on average, they have failed 3.3 providers and 6 medicines. And we spend more time taking people off medicine than putting them on. And I'm not anti-medication. I use all the tools in the toolbox, but it's never the first and only thing I think about. Brain SPECT imaging completely changed the discussion around mental health for me. No one really wants to see a psychiatrist. 1979, when I decided to be a psychiatrist, because my first wife tried to kill herself, and I took her to see a wonderful psychiatrist, and I came to realize if he helped her, it wouldn't just help her, it would help me, it would help our children, even our grandchildren, as they would be shaped by someone who was happier and more stable. But when I told my dad I wanted to be a psychiatrist, he asked me why I didn't want to be a real doctor, why I wanted to be a nut doctor and hang out with nuts all day long. So you see the shame, the stigma, and it still lives in this country, that no one really wants to see a psychiatrist. No one wants to be labeled as defective or abnormal, but everybody wants a better brain. So what if mental health was really brain health? People would see their problems as medical and not moral, decreases shame and guilt, increases compliance, and my favorite tool, it increases forgiveness and compassion in families. And the single most important lesson I have learned from 250,000 scans is you are not stuck with the brain you have. You can make it better even if you've been bad to it. And I can prove it. So Leeza Gibbons, some of you might know, she's actually from South Carolina. She's a media personality. I met her when she had her own nationally syndicated television show. Her mother and her grandmother had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. When I met her on the show, I'm like, you should come see me. When you have that family history, you want to know early whether or not you're vulnerable to trouble. And a lot of people go, no, I don't want to know. It's like, no, you want to know. If you knew a train was going to hit you, wouldn't you at least try to get out of the way? So she finally came to see me. I think she was 51, was going through a divorce and got sad. And her brain's in trouble. This is not a healthy brain. It is overall very low in activity. And SPECT can tell years before people have any symptoms if they're likely to get dementia. Now, she had depression. Did you know? Depression doubles the risk of Alzheimer's disease in women and quadruples the risk of Alzheimer's disease in men. 10 years later, doing the things I asked her to do, her brain is radically better. I am so happy for her. Don't you want a better brain 10 years from now? And, our first goal with patients is getting them to love and care for their brain, because every day you're making it better with your behavior, or you're making it worse with your behavior. Or this is Chase. He was diagnosed with bipolar disorder and social anxiety and intermittent explosive disorder. And the medicine caused him to gain 80 pounds, and he sort of hated himself. So this is his original scan, which is bumpy. And when you see the bumpiness, think toxicity. And he's got a dent in his frontal lobes, and his temporal lobes here and frontal lobes are not healthy. And I'm like, do you ever have a brain injury? So his parents actually owned the Pocono Speedway, and which meant he was around toxic fumes a lot. And then I'm like, did you ever have a brain injury? So he sent me that picture. The answer was yes. So this is him a year later after he loved his brain. We took him off his medicine, put him on nutritional supplements. That's why I have a supplement company, because I know they work when they're done in the right dosages, in the right combinations. He lost 80 pounds. He also did hyperbaric oxygen, and his brain is dramatically better. Well, how exciting is that? You are not stuck with the brain you have, even if you've been bad to it, exposed to toxic fumes and trauma. You can make your brain better. But how would you know if you never looked? All right. So there's a new revolution. Brain imaging, natural ways to heal the brain in an integrative or functional medicine model. And why an integrative or functional medicine model? Well, the whole point of your body is to carry around your brain. And so if your body is not healthy, your brain will never be healthy. And it's very important to make this connection. We talked about it with Adriana, with infectious disease, Lyme disease. We talked about it with Lisa, who had genetic vulnerability. We talked about it with Chase, who had head trauma and toxic exposure. It is critical. If you want a healthy brain, you have to have a healthy body. Now, Thomas Kuhn said stage 5 is the most predictable of all the stages. When someone comes up with a revolution, and if you believe what I'm saying, this is a complete paradigm shift where you actually have to look at the organ you're treating, and then rather than to go to medication, you think, well, what are natural ways I can heal the brain? Okay, he said the most common stage is the rejection. And I have felt that. I have been doing this specific work for 33 years, and I have been called every bad thing you can imagine, from a snake oil salesman. Although I do remind people, snake oil is 23% omega-3 fatty acids. I've been called a charlatan. I've been accused of making money off of mentally ill people, and it's not been fun. I don't like it, because I want to look at and optimize the brain. I've been demonized, belittled, threatened. 2020 came to my office in 2005, and they lied to me. They said they wanted to talk about my work with childhood bipolar disorder. And I like talking about my work. And so I was very excited to do the interview. And Richard Avia, who is the journalist, he sits down across from me, and he starts the interview with Dr. Brad Peterson from Columbia, who's a child psychiatrist and an imaging researcher. Dr. Brad Peterson told us, you should be arrested for your work. What would you say? Thank God I was on the speech team in college. And my professor, our speech coach, said, when you don't know what to say, take a breath and smile it'll come to you. And after Richard said that awful thing, I took a breath, I smiled, and I said, that's so interesting. Last week, someone told me I should win a Nobel Prize for my work. This week, you're telling me I should be arrested. I said, it sort of keeps me balanced. And we went and finished the interview. And at the end of the interview, Avia takes his microphone off, slams it to the floor, looks at the producer and said, you lied to me. This guy's legit. So Brad Peterson's a name that's going to come up again in a little bit. Stage 6, the acceptance. I mean, I'm so honored that you're having me talk to this wonderful group of people. Now, there's still a long way to go. But we're fighting for change. And one of my primary adversaries has been the American Psychiatric Association. Now, let's be clear, I hold a research award from the American Psychiatric Association, the Marie H. Eldridge Award I got in 1987. I am also a distinguished fellow of the APA. That's the highest award they give to members. But yet they've actually written position papers against imaging. I mean, it's like, how would you know if you don't look? But your position is we shouldn't look. Well, just 2 weeks ago, the APA had its annual meeting, and they created a video on me as I'm now an APA thought leader. And some people at the convention, I think, had a stroke when they went, how did that happen? So we have a global reach. We have actually seen patients from 155 countries, and we have trained mental health practitioners, I think, in 65 countries. I did the big NFL study at a time when the NFL was having trouble with the truth on traumatic brain injury in football. I have scanned and treated over 400 NFL players. I mean, like cool players like Dick Butkus and Terry Bradshaw, Eric Dickerson, Freddie Dryer, and they had high levels of damage. Like, own it. Like, stop saying it's not a brain damaging sport. It is a brain damaging sport. This was actually published in the Journal of Neuropsychiatry and Clinical Neurosciences, which is an APA journal. But, you know, I think most thoughtful 9-year-olds would not believe the NFL when they said, well, we don't know if playing football is a brain. I think most 9-year-olds would figure it out. But the question I had that was actually the more interesting question is, can I make their brains better? And we published a follow-up study showing on a handful of nutritional supplements, multiple vitamin fish oil, Brain Boost, that we created along with a brain healthy program, which is 3 things: love your brain, this term we call brain envy, avoid things that hurt it, do things that help it. 80% of our players were better, and their brains were better, especially in the prefrontal cortex, which is critically important because that's involved in forethought and planning, decision-making, empathy. Our players reported better memory, mood, attention, and sleep. And as an example, it's one of our players, Anthony Davis, the Hall of Fame running back from USC. He's called the Notre Dame Killer because in 1972, he scored 6 touchdowns against the University of Notre Dame. They hated him so much that they put his picture on the walkway at the University of Notre Dame so they could walk on him And in 1974, he scored 4 more touchdowns. When he came to see me in 2007, he's actually the father of my NFL work. His brain was very damaged, but on our program, including 10 years later, his brain is better. We just couldn't be more excited for him. In 2011, our foundation received its first large grant to create a searchable database with scans, diagnoses, response to treatment. It is now what I believe is the world's largest brain imaging database in psychiatry, and we have published dozens of studies on gender, aging, ADHD, marijuana, body mass index, weight, and supplements. We just got 2 new studies accepted for publication last week, one on adverse childhood experiences, the other on SPECT, predicting treatment response to depression. 2016, Discover Magazine listed our research as one of the top 100 stories in science for 2015. 18 was Tesla charges into renewable energy storage. 20 was the discovery of a vegan dinosaur species, the Chileosaurus. 19 was our work. Brain scans may lead to better diagnoses. I sent this to all of my critics, or at least as many as I could think of. And we're not the only ones. I mean, this is really important to understand. In the United States, their GE that makes the medicine we use to do SPECT, there are 160 places in the United States that do brain SPECT imaging. I have 11 of them. For some reason, not quite sure why, Canada has figured this out before the US. In 2021, the Canadian Association of Nuclear Medicine wrote procedure guidelines for SPECT basically as if I wrote them. And that was a very happy day for me. Talk about it in my book, You Happier. All right, I told you I'd talk about Dr. Peterson again. Well, after he said that truly insane thing to 2020, I looked him up. I didn't know him. And Manuel Trujillo works with me in our Manhattan clinic, and he supervised Brad Peterson as a resident. And he got Dr. Peterson and I together, and since about 2010, we have been doing research together. This is our paper on bipolar disorder, and we have a brand new one coming out on depression. So the same Dr. Peterson who told 2020 I should be arrested, he now doesn't think I should go to jail, and he's joining the revolution. I love that so much. Dr. Phil, who I adore, has had me on 24 times. We talk about imaging. We did a brand new show this week. He has a new network, Merit Street Media, and we look to explain the mental mess of Gen Z in part through the lens of imaging. It's not a secret that I have some influential patients, and 4 of my public patients have over 1.5 billion followers, and I enlist them. It's like the mission is to end mental illness by creating a revolution in brain health, and I want them to help me. And I do this show on Instagram called Scan My Brain. And I did the famous DJ, Steve Aoki. And I asked them, I'm going to help you, but I want you to help me. And I told Steve, I said, I want you to make brain health cool. And he actually started a foundation to make brain health cool. And it's public knowledge. I've been Miley's doctor for 12 years. And it wasn't easy. And we went through some really hard times together. But when it clicked, and this is why you often have to be patient, because it didn't click initially. When it clicks, she's now a leader for brain health. And her song Flowers, which is about self-love, she got the Grammy for Song of the Year. So I'm very proud of her. I did a program with Pastor Rick Warren called The Daniel Plan. Pastor Warren is the senior pastor at Saddleback Church. They have 18 locations, and he is the author of our generation's best-selling book, The Purpose-Driven Life. And one Sunday, I just finished writing Change Your Brain, Change Your Body, and I went to my church here in Southern California, and I walked by hundreds of donuts for sale for charity, and it really made me unhappy. And I've been going to church since I was 4 years old, and I'd always seen the donuts, but that day, they really made me unhappy. And then I saw bacon and sausage cooking on grills right around the donuts, and then they were cooking hot dogs, and it was like whack, whack, whack. And as I sat down, the minister started talking about the ice cream festival they had the night before. And I'm furious because it's crystallizing in my mind. I'm going to church to get my soul fed. These people are trying to kill me. And when my wife found me in church, I'm typing on my phone, and she hates, me on the device. And she gave me that look that only your wife can give you, like, why the hell are you on that thing in church? Don't you know you're going to hell? And I showed her what I was typing. Go to church, get donuts, bacon, sausage, hot dogs, ice cream. They have no idea they are sending people to heaven early. Save them, then kill them. This is not the plan. So I prayed, I do that Sunday morning, that God would use me to change the culture of food at church. So if you don't like the word prayer, you can just say intention. And no lie, 2 weeks later, Rick Warren called me. I had never met Pastor Warren. And he said, I'm fat, my church is fat, will you help me? And together with my friend Mark Hyman, we created a program for Saddleback Church called the Daniel Plan, 40 Days to a Healthier Life, based on these 5 pillars: faith, why do you care, food, fitness, focus, which was brain health, and friends, we get better or sick together. January 15th, 2011, 15,000 people signed up. The first year they lost £250,000. We wrote an international best-selling book, The Daniel Plan, and now thousands of churches around the world have done our program. I know we can create this revolution. I know we can do this, but I need your help. So how can you be part of it? One, you have to live the message. If you don't live the message, you suck as a messenger. There's no other way to say that. If you don't live the message of brain and mental health, you can't give it away. So creating this revolution requires authenticity. 2, you have to start scanning people. How do you know unless you look? And when you start scanning people, it saves money in the long run. There's a study presented at the APA in 1992. So I started imaging people in 1991. I'm so excited about it. I go to the APA in 1992 to an all-day lecture on brain SPECT imaging in child psychiatry. And the doctors from Creighton University, they were doing what I was doing, and we were all really excited about it. They presented a study where they looked at 100 bipolar teenagers, 100 inpatient bipolar teenagers. 50 of them are scanned on the day of admission, 50 of them were never scanned. The kids who were never scanned, their average length of stay was 44 days. The kids who were scanned, their average length of stay, now remember this is 1991 when you could keep kids in the hospital, the average length of stay for the kids who were scanned was 17 days. It was an average cost savings of $15,000 per hospital stay. It saves money because you get to the answer faster. 3, put brain health into your practices and organizations. I just think that's so important. If you really want to address the mental health crisis, we have to address the brain health crisis. And then ultimately, you have to ask yourself, why do you care about giving or being part of this revolution? And let me tell you, I dedicated my book, The End of Mental Illness, to my 2 nieces, Amelie, who's 14, and Alize, who's 19. They have a family history of multiple suicides, schizophrenia, drug abuse, anxiety disorders, and depression. But we know genes only load the gun. It's what happens to us that pulls the trigger. And they were raised in chaos with parents who were who struggled with addiction, domestic violence, and depression. They had multiple moves, went to multiple schools. They lived in filth. This was one of the homes, it was a garage, it was one of the homes they lived in. Life was severely unpredictable for these girls. And in 2016, they were taken by Child Protective Service into foster care where more traumas occurred. Now, my wife and I didn't know them. They are the kids of Tana, my wife's half-sister, Tamara. And we got notified of them when they were in foster care. And Tana said, "You don't really want to have anything to do with that part of my family." And it really made me very unhappy they were in foster care. And we ended up getting involved. Now, all of us would agree these girls are at extremely high risk for mental illness. And my work is dedicated to ending mental illness in people like Alize and Amelie, but also in their children and grandchildren. So, of course, we scan them. And Alize's scan, when she's 12, is severely damaged through no fault of her own, but because of her mom's alcohol and drug use. So where would she be without intervention? She would likely have repeated the trauma she experienced and damaged another generation. Helping people change their brains can change the trajectory of their lives and impact future generations. So with treatment, supplements, optimizing her important numbers, hyperbaric oxygen, a year later, her brain is healing. How exciting is that? And where are the girls now? They're happy. They're both A students. They're social. They're no longer addicted to hot Cheetos. You should have seen our first grocery store trip. Alize is a pre-med at UCLA on a full ride scholarship studying psychobiology, and she's working at a psychiatry lab of the future. I am so proud of her. So you can be part of the revolution. And ultimately, you got to get this information, get it, understand it, live it, and then you have to give it away, because it is in the act of giving that you create your own support group, making it more likely you stay on this brain health program forever. All right. Thank you so much. I am so honored to be part of your conference.
We are so thankful that you all came today. This is the end for most of you, but if you have a VIP pass, we'd like you to come and ask some questions with Dr. Amen in the VIP room in room 104. Otherwise, we hope you have a safe evening and a happy weekend.